Have you ever just stopped and thought about how America, this leader in innovation, amazing universities,
Hmm.
seems to consistently fall short on something as basic as K-12 schools,
Yeah.
or how we spend more money on healthcare than, well, literally anyone else, but we still leave millions of people uninsured or, drowning in medical debt. It's kind of baffling, isn't it?
It absolutely is. And it's something we really need to look at. It's not just education and healthcare either. You see these similar struggles with retirement. I mean, even people who seem financially comfortable can get hit just blindsided by how incredibly expensive getting older can be here.
Right.
These aren't just small problems, They're signs that these big fundamental systems, they're just not working as well as they could be. Especially when you look at efficiency or fairness or just basic outcomes compared to, well, other developed countries.
That's exactly it. That's the core of what we want to unpack today. So for this deep dive, we're going to pull from a whole stack of research, look at lessons from countries all over the world, countries that are getting better results, sometimes with way fewer resources or maybe just, smarter systems overall. So our mission here is to find some real concrete ideas, actual blueprints for reform that could help the U.S. fix some of these gaps, build stronger, fairer, more sustainable systems for everybody.
Well,
Okay, let's unpack this. We're going to really dive into how countries like, say, Finland, Singapore, Germany, and others are tackling challenges that feel, well, all too familiar here in the U.S.
yeah.
and see what we can learn from their playbooks.
Yeah, it's a crucial conversation because the differences, honestly, are pretty stark. The solutions, a lot of them, they're already out there. They're working right now.
All right, let's kick things off with what we're kind of calling the global disconnect.
Hmm.
Just think about it. America, this amazing innovator, leader in so many ways, but then K-12 education. We're surprisingly average or worse.
Hmm.
Our sources keep pointing this out. We spend more per student than most other countries, often a lot more better students. They consistently score kind of middling on international tests.
That's a really key point, and maybe we should quickly explain PISA for listeners.
Good idea.
Right, so PISA is the Program for International Student Assessment. It's this big global study run by the OECD, that's the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. And it looks at how 15-year-olds are doing in reading, math, and science.
Okay.
So when the U.S. lands in the middle, or sometimes lower, despite spending so much, it's a huge red flag. It tells you it's not just about the money, it's how the money's being used, and maybe the whole philosophy behind the system. Just throwing cash at the same old model without changing the structure, well, it doesn't lead to better or fairer results. PISA really highlights that year after year.
And it gets even more, almost unbelievable when you look at healthcare. The U.S. spends nearly 18%. 18%. Of our entire GDP on healthcare.
Yeah, it's staggering.
It's just a massive amount, way more than any other developed country. But what do we get for it? Tens of millions of people with no insurance at all, or they're so underinsured that one bad diagnosis, one accident can just ruin them financially. Medical bankruptcy, that's pretty much just an American thing. Tragically. Our sources basically describe the system as fragmented, way too focused on profit, and just ridiculously complex.
It really seems like it's built more for profit than for, public health or making sure everyone can get care. That fragmentation is a huge piece of it. You've got thousands of different insurance companies, endless plans, different providers, complex rules.
It's a mess.
It creates this enormous administrative burden, right? Billions just disappear into paperwork and overhead instead of going to actual patient care. And all that complexity, it's not just inefficient. It makes it harder for people to actually get the care they need. It pushes families into really tough spots financially, even people who think they have good insurance.
Yeah.
The amount of money going into admin, marketing, profits instead of care, it's just wildly different from how most other countries do it.
And then there's retirement. Seems far off for some, but it hits fast. Our sources really emphasize how incredibly expensive it is to age in America now.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just a problem for lower income folks.
Yeah.
Even people who've had good careers think they're set.
Mm-hmm.
Often, they're just not ready for the costs.
Mm-hmm.
There was this one story really stuck with me from the sources. A retired doctor, someone you'd assume had saved a lot, paying $11,000 a month for care.
Wow, $11,000.
Right. When I read that, I just thought, wow, it should make anyone stop and think, how prepared am I really? Or my parents? It's a pretty sobering thought.
That story really hits home because it shows a bigger problem, right?
Yeah.
Our usual wars of planning for retirement, maybe focusing on getting a certain nest egg or replacing a percentage of our income, they often just don't account for these massive rising costs of long-term care or specialized medical needs or even just the cost of living going up. A lot of people, it's not their fault. They just haven't factored in these huge potential expenses.
Yeah.
And that leads to serious financial problems later on. It's not just about having income. It's about affording this whole new, very expensive stage of life.
So it really makes you wonder, for you listening, how do these big system problems touch your own life, your family, your choices? Maybe it's picking schools or getting a surprise medical bill that throws everything off or trying to figure out how you'll actually afford retirement. These aren't abstract issues, right? They affect so many of us directly.
Yeah.
Create real stress.
Exactly. And when you look at the root causes, it's clear these aren't just little glitches we can easily fix. In all three areas, education, healthcare, retirement, the research points to deep structural problems.
Like what? What are the common threads?
Well, you see this theme of fragmentation everywhere. Different parts of the system just don't connect or work together well. That creates waste and people fall through the cracks. Then there's the profit motive, especially in healthcare, where making money can seem more important than, public good or patient health.
Right. You also see a real lack of equitable funding. Access to good schools or healthcare can depend way too much on where you live or how much money you have. And in education, this huge over-reliance on certain metrics, like standardized tests, can actually narrow what gets taught and kill the love of learning instead of measuring it properly. What's really striking and maybe counterintuitive is that even though the U.S. has incredible resources, incredible wealth, incredible brain power, these problems just stick around.
Yeah, why is that?
Well, it strongly suggests the issue isn't just a lack of money, it's how we spend it, where it goes, and really the basic ideas and values our systems are built on. It's not about scarcity, it feels more like it's about design and priorities and maybe political will. Other rich countries, sometimes with less money per person than us, get much better, fairer results because their systems are based on different principles, often focused on universal access, community well-being, and efficiency, not just profit. That leads us right into our next big topic, fixing education, a global playbook for K-12. The sources we looked at are really clear here. The American K-12 system doesn't just need a few small changes. It needs some bold structural rethinking, a whole new way of looking at it. But here's the encouraging part. According to all this research, the solutions aren't a sum fantasy. They're, quote, already out there, proven by countries that spend less but achieve more. It's not about reinventing the wheel. It's about looking hard at what works elsewhere and figuring out how to adapt it.
Absolutely. The knowledge is there if we're willing to look. It means seeing these successful models, understanding why they work, what their core principles are, and then applying those ideas thoughtfully, in an American context. Not just copying blindly, but learning and adapting.
So let's start with one that always fascinates me and often surprises people, elevating the teaching profession, the Finland model. In Finland, being a teacher isn't just, a job. It's seen as a really high-status profession, right up there with being a doctor or a lawyer.
That's a massive cultural and systemic difference. Our sources show that in Finland, all teachers need a master's degree. And maybe even more importantly, getting into a teacher training program is incredibly competitive. Only the top grads get in.
Wow.
So it's not just about the degree itself. It's about setting up this demanding pipeline that pulls the smartest, most dedicated, most curious people into teaching. It automatically raises the status and the intellectual perception of the job.
And once they get through that tough process and are actually in the classroom, they're not buried under red tape or forced to just teach to the test, right?
Exactly. They get real professional autonomy. They're trusted, they're paid well, have good working conditions. And crucially, there isn't this obsessive focus on standardized tests. Teachers have the freedom to innovate, to adjust their methods, to really meet the needs of their actual students.
That trust and autonomy must be key.
It's fundamental. When you treat teachers like experts, like professionals, they can make those smart, nuanced decisions that actually help kids develop fully, not just hit a test score target. It leads to deeper, richer learning. And it creates this culture where teachers themselves are always learning and improving.
So looking at Finland, what could the U.S. actually do? What are the concrete steps? Our sources suggest things like, well, obviously, raising teacher salaries significantly to attract top talent, making teacher training programs much more rigorous and consistently high quality everywhere, starting to treat teachers like, nation builders, vital professionals, not just employees. And a big one, getting rid of this over-reliance on standardized tests. Give educators back their autonomy.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Just picture it for a second. What if becoming a teacher here in the US had the same kind of prestige, the same draw as becoming, say, a top surgeon or a high-powered lawyer? What kind of massive changes might that cause across our schools?
Oh, the ripple effects would be huge, truly transformative, not just small improvements. First, like you said, the talent pipeline would just fundamentally change. You'd attract incredibly bright, driven people who maybe right now go into other fields, because teaching would be seen as this intellectually stimulating, high-impact, respected career.
Right.
And that level of professionalization, it wouldn't just lift test scores a bit. It would create this dynamic culture of innovation inside schools. When teachers are seen as intellectual leaders, they're constantly thinking about how kids learn critical thinking, problem solving, creativity, not just what facts to memorize. That's the real game changer. It shifts the whole focus from just delivering content to real human development. It changes how society itself values education.
And while Finland nails the professionalization piece, another absolutely vital part of a top system is making sure it's fair, it's equitable. And for that, our sources really point towards Canada. Their system is decentralized, run by provinces, but they still get world-class results without the huge gaps in outcomes we see between rich and poor areas here.
That really comes down to their commitment to equity as a core value. The research shows that Canadian public schools, whether they're in wealthy suburbs or poorer rural areas, tend to deliver pretty similar results. And a big reason for that is how they fund schools. It's not so heavily based on local property taxes.
Oh, yeah. The funding formula. That's huge.
It is. They also really prioritize support for immigrant students, for Indigenous students, working hard to make sure everyone's included and historical disadvantages are addressed.
And the results. Canada consistently ranks near the top internationally in reading, science, math, but with much less inequality between students.
Yeah.
Their policies seem genuinely diversity-friendly, and again, their teachers are unionized, well-paid, professionally respected. Another echo of that professionalization theme.
Yeah, that consistency across different regions and different student groups is really the mark of an equitable system. The sources strongly suggest that if the U.S. reformed school funding away from local property taxes, invested more in schools serving low-income kids, not less, and provided real wraparound support like nutrition, counseling, family outreach, we could really move towards that Canadian model of excellence for everyone.
Okay, let's tackle something that causes a lot of stress here.
Yeah.
Standardized testing. Our sources show that relying too heavily on these tests in the U.S. often forces teachers to just teach to the test, narrows what gets taught, and ramps up anxiety for kids. But places like Finland and the Netherlands prove you can get great results with way fewer tests.
It's a really stark difference. Finland, for example, the research says they have basically no standardized testing in K-12 except for one big exam at the very end of high school.
Wow, just one.
Just one. And the Netherlands, they put a huge emphasis on student well-being. They actually have national policies aimed at reducing stress and avoiding over-testing. Both countries focus much more on deeper learning, project-based work, letting kids explore topics. That leads to more engagement, more creativity, more genuine understanding.
So the takeaway for the U.S. seems pretty obvious. We need to break this addiction to standardized tests as the main way we measure success for both students and schools. We could shift away from teaching to the test towards things like collaborative projects, solving real problems, nurturing creativity. It's about building critical thinking, right? Not just memorizing facts for a bubble sheet.
And that lines up perfectly with what we know about how people really learn best. True understanding doesn't come from just passively remembering stuff. It comes from doing, questioning, exploring, creating. When kids get to dig into subjects they're curious about, they develop skills that stick with them long after the test is over. It builds that growth mindset, seeing learning as a journey, not just a score.
What about starting earlier? It seems like many top countries don't wait until middle school to build a strong foundation. They invest big in early childhood education. Japan and Singapore come up a lot here in the sources.
That early investment is absolutely foundational. In Singapore, the sources say the early years are carefully designed to build character, curiosity, core skills. Finland, even though formal school starts later at age 7, they have this amazing, widely available early childhood system focused on play and emotional intelligence.
Play? That's interesting.
Yeah. And the Netherlands also shows great results from their early childhood programs, even with relatively short school days. The key seems to be being really intentional about development right from the start.
So for the U.S., this points towards things like making high-quality preschool accessible to all kids, no matter their family income, prioritizing social-emotional learning just as much as reading and numbers, and really supporting parents with resources right from birth. Build that strong foundation early. Don't try to fix problems later.
Exactly. Investing in early childhood isn't just a nice thing to do. It's one of the smartest investments a society can make. It tackles developmental needs early, leading to better results not just in school, but in health, social skills, economic success later in life. It's a proactive strategy that pays off massively for everyone in the long run.
And as the world changes so fast, our curriculum needs to keep up too. Estonia is a fascinating example here. A small country, but they've gone all in on digital learning, coding, even entrepreneurship, starting really young. Their whole approach is geared towards preparing kids for a future that looks very different from the past.
That's so critical for any education system today. The sources really push for the U.S. to systematically integrate things like digital literacy, financial literacy, climate science, ethical thinking into the curriculum at all levels, not just as add-ons, but woven into everything.
They also talk about partnering more with businesses, bringing modern tools and maybe mentorship into schools, and focusing on adaptability, teaching kids how to learn, unlearn, relearn, not just cramming content.
Right. That creates a much more dynamic classroom where kids aren't just soaking up information, they're learning to navigate this constantly changing world. The focus shifts from just what you know to how you think, how you solve problems, how you keep learning throughout your life. Those are the skills that really matter for a future we can't even fully picture yet.
And what happens after high school? Our sources suggest we really need to rethink the college-for-all mentality and look at vocational paths, maybe taking cues from Germany's dual system.
Yeah, the German model is really interesting. They offer clear, respected paths, either academic or vocational, based on a student's interests and strengths. And crucially, there's no stigma attached to doing an apprenticeship or getting technical training.
That's a big cultural difference from here, isn't it? Where often it feels like a four-year degree is the only path seen as truly successful.
It is. Germany's system values different kinds of talent and skills equally. They recognize that a master electrician or a skilled machinist or a great coder who came through an apprenticeship is just as vital to the economy, maybe more so than some university grads. It's about respecting competence however you gain it.
So, what could we do? Expand career and technical education, CTE, in high schools, build stronger partnerships with businesses and unions for apprenticeships, and maybe culturally start valuing different paths after high school, college, trade school, arts. Starting a business is equally valid.
Absolutely. That kind of shift would open up huge opportunities for students who aren't suited for a purely academic track or who have real hands-on talents. It also connects education much better to what the economy actually needs, provides clear routes to good jobs without mountains of debt, and ultimately makes the whole country more productive.
Lastly, there's this growing focus globally on the whole child. Our sources mention South Korea making a shift. They're famous for intense academic pressure, right? But now they're trying to bring in more creativity, more focus on well-being, realizing that the pressure takes a toll on mental health.
That's a really important development. They're starting to emphasize emotional growth, physical health, ethical development alongside the academics. Japan has done this for a while too, with moral and character education built into their curriculum. It's this understanding that kids aren't just brains on sticks. Academic success alone isn't enough if they aren't mentally and emotionally healthy.
So for us, that could mean things like integrating mental health support, wellness programs, character education into all schools, maybe seriously looking at things like reducing homework or starting school later for teenagers, aligning with their sleep needs, and just generally trying to bring more joy and engagement back into learning, not making it all about achievement pressure.
It's about recognizing that students have all these interconnected needs: social, emotional, physical, intellectual. A good education system supports all of them. It prepares kids not just for tests, but for life. Makes them resilient, responsible, thoughtful citizens.
Okay, so looking across all these different successful systems, Finland, Canada, Singapore, Germany, Estonia, others, despite all their differences, there seem to be some common threads, right? What are the big takeaways?
Yeah, definitely. Several things stand out. First, that professionalization of teaching. Treating teachers like the experts they are, it's huge. Second, this deep commitment to equity, making sure excellence is for everyone, not just a privileged few. Third, finding a real balance between academic rigor and student well-being. You need both. And finally, this ongoing commitment to innovation, constantly adapting to what the future demands, whether it's tech skills or emotional intelligence. And tying it all together, what these countries show is that just being wealthy isn't enough to guarantee a great education system. It really matters how you use that wealth, what you invest in, and the underlying values guiding those choices. Which leads to a big question for the U.S., doesn't it? What values are we actually prioritizing? Is it test scores above all else? Or is it developing well-rounded, curious, capable human beings with equal opportunity? These global models strongly suggest the latter is the path to real success.
Okay, moving from education to something equally, maybe even more, urgent and stressful for so many Americans, healthcare. The sources we reviewed paint a really stark picture. The U.S. system isn't just the most expensive in the world by far, it's also one of the least effective at actually covering everybody. We mentioned the stats earlier, nearly 18% of GDP gone, tens of millions uninsured, people going bankrupt from medical bills. So what does that really mean for us day to day? It means we're spending almost double, sometimes triple, per person compared to other wealthy nations, but we still have this broken system and millions are left vulnerable. It's not just numbers on a spreadsheet, it's deeply human. It affects families, businesses, our whole society's health and productivity. When people can't afford to see a doctor, or a sickness wipes out their savings, that's a crisis.
You're absolutely right. It's a massive drag on everything. When people are afraid to get care because of the cost, or when illness means instant financial disaster, it just undermines the foundation of a healthy society. And that inefficiency we talked about, so much of that healthcare spending isn't actually buying us better health. It's getting eaten up by admin costs, marketing, profits, which, as the sources stress, is just fundamentally different from how other developed countries manage things. It's a misallocation of epic proportions.
The sources seem very clear. Real, effective reform needs to hit two big goals at the same time. We have to dramatically lower the crazy costs, and we have to provide universal healthcare access for every single American.
Yeah.
You can't really do one without the other, right?
Exactly. You can't realistically cover everyone if the costs stay astronomically high. And you can't effectively control costs if the system stays so fragmented with all these different insurers and profit motives pulling in different directions. They really are two sides of the same coin. A unified, universal system is almost inherently more efficient and thus more affordable.
So let's break down 5 key reforms for healthcare that come up again and again, inspired by these global successes. First, moving to universal public insurance, or a really tightly regulated nonprofit system.
Right. This gets at the basic structure of how we pay for care. The sources point to two main paths. One is a single-payer system, like Canada or Taiwan have, where the government is basically the main insurer for everyone.
Okay.
The other path is having a network of insurers, but they're strictly regulated and mostly nonprofit, like you see in Germany, France, or the Netherlands. The key thing they have in common is getting rid of, or at least drastically limiting, the role of for-profit insurance companies. Those companies spend billions on overhead, marketing, executive salaries money that adds to the cost but doesn't actually help patients get better.
That makes a lot of sense. The waste in our current setup with all the different companies and plans is just mind-boggling, which leads right into the second big reform, standardized pricing for services and drugs.
This is a huge lever other countries use to control costs. They set national or regional fee schedules, so you don't have these wild variations in price for the exact same procedure or drug, depending on which hospital you go to or which insurance you have.
Yeah, the price differences here are insane.
Absolutely. And critically, other countries use their collective buying power to negotiate much, much lower prices for prescription drugs, sometimes 50% less or even more. It's bulk purchasing. That stops the kind of price gouging that happens way too often in our market-driven system.
Which brings us to number 3, administrative simplification. The sources say the U.S. spends something like 4 to 5 times more on healthcare administration than comparable countries. 4 to 5 times. That's just unbelievable waste.
It really is. Think about all the different billing codes, the claims processing, the insurance checks, the paperwork doctors and hospitals and patients have to deal with constantly.
It's a nightmare.
Streamlining all of that, maybe with a central electronic system like Taiwan's smart card approach, could save hundreds of billions every year. It's not just about efficiency. It would free up doctors and nurses to actually focus on treating patients, not filling out forms. Imagine that.
Our fourth reform shifts focus to prevention and primary care. The idea is to move investment away from just reacting to emergencies and complex specialist care and put more resources into robust primary care, preventive services, and public health efforts.
This is about playing the long game, focusing on value, Right now, our system mostly pays fee-for-service. Doctors get paid for doing more things, whether or not the patient actually gets healthier overall.
Right. More procedures, more money.
Exactly. Shifting to value-based care means paying providers for keeping people healthy for good outcomes. That naturally encourages more prevention, more focus on primary care. Japan's emphasis on healthy lifestyle education as a national policy is a great example, trying to keep people healthy so they don't need expensive hospital stays later.
And the fifth big one, ending employer-based insurance, decoupling health coverage from your job. The sources argue this would boost the economy, help entrepreneurs, and make things much fairer.
Employer-based insurance is really just an accident of history from World War II wage controls, and it
Yeah.
makes millions of people incredibly vulnerable. Lose your job, lose your health care. That's terrifying.
It's crazy.
Replacing it with publicly financed universal insurance paid for through fair taxes and employer contributions, like in Japan or Germany, frees people up. You could change jobs, start a business, retire without that fear of losing coverage. It makes healthcare what it should be, a right, not just a job perk.
It's so clear other countries are doing things very differently and getting better results. Let's look at some specifics. Taiwan spends just 6.7% of GDP on health, and everyone's covered. How do they pull that off?
Taiwan's system is famous for efficiency. It's single payer, and they use this brilliant smart card system that holds all your medical records and simplifies billing, cuts down admin costs massively, reduces fraud. Plus, they use global budgeting. They set an overall spending cap for the whole system, which forces everyone to be really efficient with resources.
Okay, smart cards and budget caps.
Mm-hmm.
What about Germany and France? They spend more, around 11-something% of GDP, but still get universal coverage. What's their model?
They have what's called a pluralistic system, multiple insurers, but, and this is key, the insurers are tightly regulated and mostly nonprofit. They're not driven by maximizing shareholder value like here. They have to cover everyone. So you get some choice, but within a framework that prioritizes access and public health, not profit. They manage to blend market elements with strong social protection.
And the UK and Sweden, similar spending levels, universal coverage, they focus on public infrastructure.
Yeah, they invest heavily in publicly owned hospitals and clinics, like the NHS in the UK. They directly employ a lot of doctors and nurses. This ensures that care is available everywhere, even in rural or poor areas that private companies might ignore. It guarantees a baseline level of quality and access across the whole country.
And Japan, lean spending at 10.7% GDP, universal coverage. They use price controls but still innovate and focus on healthy lifestyles.
Japan's fascinating. The government actively sets prices for drugs and services, keeping things affordable, but they still have a thriving medical tech sector, and their public health focus, promoting healthy living from a young age, helps keep people out of the hospital in the first place. It's a really holistic approach. Control costs, promote health, ensure access. It really forces us to ask that question here in the U.S., doesn't it? Can we truly make healthcare a human right without moving away from this profit-first model? These other countries prove that universal coverage and lower costs aren't opposites. In fact, they usually go together because simplifying and regulating the system cuts out all the waste and administrative bloat that plagues our current approach. It challenges that whole idea that only the free market can deliver something as essential as health.
Okay, we've hit education, we've hit healthcare. Now let's turn to that third crucial pillar, retirement security. As our sources made clear earlier, just getting older is incredibly expensive in America. And tons of people, even those who seemed financially successful, just aren't prepared for the costs. That $11,000 a month Dr. Bill anecdote still sticks with me. It's not just an extreme case, it highlights a real looming crisis for a lot of Americans.
Yeah, that story really drives home how traditional retirement plans like 401ks or even Social Security often just aren't enough anymore. They weren't designed for the kind of long-term care costs, the complex medical needs, or even just the basic cost of living that people face today, especially here in the U.S., where healthcare costs are so high. It's a huge gap in planning for most people.
So facing that challenge, the sources really zero in on Singapore's Central Provident Fund, the CPF system, as this really powerful, maybe even revolutionary alternative model. It's described as this mandatory, lifelong savings system that covers not just retirement, but also healthcare and even housing.
Okay, let's unpack this. A mandatory system, split into different accounts, guarantees income for life, and even gives you high interest rates. That sounds incredibly different from our system of, optional 401ks and Social Security. Can you walk us through how it actually works? It sounds pretty complex.
It is comprehensive, definitely. It's designed to weave together these major life needs. So at its heart, the CPF is mandatory. Both employees and employers have to contribute a pretty big chunk of salary every single year. For workers 55 and under, for example, it's 20% from the employee and another 17% from the employer.
Wow, 37% total. That's huge.
It is substantial. The rates vary a bit by age and income, but the point is consistent, hefty savings throughout your working life. It builds a really solid foundation.
So where does all that money go? It's not just one big pile, right? You use it in multiple accounts.
Right, and that's the clever design. The money gets split into three main accounts. There's the ordinary account, OA. You can use that for things like buying a home, paying for education, some investments. Then the special account, SA, that's purely for retirement savings and investments that usually offer higher, safer returns. And third, the MediSave account, MA, that's strictly for healthcare costs. Hospital bills, certain outpatient treatments, health insurance premiums. So you have dedicated pots for different needs.
Okay, OA for housing and education, SA for retirement, MA for health. What happens when you get closer to retirement age? Do these combine?
Yes, there's a key step at age 55. A new retirement account, RA, is created. Money from your special account and some from your ordinary account flows into this RA. This pools funds specifically for your retirement income, protecting that money for your later years.
And you mentioned lifelong payouts. How does that part work? Is it like an annuity?
Exactly. It's essentially a national annuity scheme called CPF, Lifelong Income for the Elderly. Starting at age 65, you get monthly payouts from your RA savings for the rest of your life, no matter how long you live.
Guaranteed for life.
Guaranteed for life. The amount depends on how much you saved and which payout plan you choose. They have different options. But the goal is to provide a reliable income stream to cover basic living costs throughout retirement. You might be able to take out some lump sums too under certain rules, but the core is that lifelong security.
That sounds incredibly secure. What about retiring early or needing money before 65?
Well, the official retirement age is 63, going up to 64 soon. But they actually encourage people to work longer until 68 with policies to support that. At 55, you can withdraw some CPF money, but only after you've set aside what they call the full retirement sum in your RA. That amount, around SGD $213,600 for 2025, has to stay put to fund those future lifelong payouts starting at 65. So there's some flexibility, but the long-term security comes first.
What if someone still doesn't have enough, maybe a low-wage worker? Are there safety nets within the system?
Yes, absolutely. They have supplementary schemes. The Silver Support Scheme gives cash payouts to low-income elderly with limited savings. The Workfare Income Supplement tops up wages and CPF savings for older low-wage workers while they're still working. There are also ways for seniors to unlock money from their homes. Housing monetization. And crucial healthcare subsidies using MediSave and other government help keep medical costs manageable, which protects retirement savings.
And the interest rates, you said they were high.
They're significantly higher than typical bank rates, and they're guaranteed. The OA gets at least 2.5%, and the SA, MA, and RA get at least 4%. Plus, there's an extra 1% on the first SGD 60,000 for older members. That guaranteed steady growth makes a huge difference over decades. It builds wealth reliably without the market risks we often face with 401ks.
Okay, that's a really clear picture of how it works. But why did Singapore go this route, this super mandatory centralized system? What's the thinking behind it?
It's deeply tied to Singapore's history and philosophy. A huge part is this emphasis on self-reliance and individual responsibility. The government believes people should provide for themselves, not depend on welfare. So the CPF basically compels everyone to save for retirement, housing, and healthcare. It reduces reliance on the state or family. This fits with their reluctance to build a big European-style welfare state, given their small size and lack of natural resources.
So it's forcing responsibility, but within a very strong government framework, kind of a unique combination.
Exactly. And it also creates tremendous economic and social stability. Linking CPF to housing means over 90% of Singaporeans own their homes, often paid for with CPF funds. That stability plus healthcare security through MediSave reduces immediate financial stress, and the high savings rates prevent old age poverty and lessen the government's future financial burden.
And their aging population must be a huge factor too, right? They're aging super fast.
It's absolutely central. By 2030, maybe 1 in 4 citizens will be over 65. CPF Life, the annuity part, is designed specifically so people don't outlive their savings. And encouraging older workers to stay employed helps both the economy and individual retirement funds. It's a very deliberate, strategic response to a demographic shift that many countries, including the U.S., are frankly struggling to address proactively.
And it wasn't just created overnight like this. It evolved.
Oh, yeah. It started back in 1955 as just a basic retirement savings plan. Then in the 60s, they added the housing component, which was critical for development. Healthcare came in the 80s. The mandatory aspect was key early on to build savings in a young country that didn't have much of a safety net. It grew and adapted very pragmatically over time.
And fiscally, how does it compare to Western pensions? You hear about unfunded liabilities here all the time.
That's a massive difference. Many Western systems rely on today's workers paying for today's retirees, creating huge future obligations. Singapore's CPF is fully funded. Your savings are your savings. The money is invested mainly by their sovereign wealth fund to generate returns. It's self-sustaining, doesn't burden future taxpayers in the same way. It's very fiscally conservative.
But no system's perfect. What are the downsides or criticisms of the CPF?
True. A key concern is adequacy. For some, especially lower earners, the payouts might only cover basic needs, not a comfortable retirement. Another is flexibility. It's quite rigid. Not being able to access much of your money before 55 frustrates some people who need cash sooner. And there are questions about inequality, since higher earners benefit more from tax breaks and investment options within the system. But what's really striking is that even with those criticisms, it promotes self-reliance while still guaranteeing a baseline for everyone. It's not perfect, but it shows this incredible commitment to planning ahead, tackling demographic challenges head-on, and using mandatory savings to ensure collective well-being. A very different approach than the U.S. is used to.
And Singapore isn't the only alternative retirement model out there, right? We touched on Germany. Are there others?
Oh, definitely. The world has lots of blueprints. Look at the Netherlands. Their system is consistently ranked among the world's best. It's got multiple pillars, a basic state pension for everyone, but the real strength comes from mandatory, industry-wide collective pension funds.
Collective funds. How does that work?
Yeah. Basically, entire sectors or industries have their own pension funds that both employers and employees pay into. They're professionally managed, pool risks across huge groups, benefit from economies of scale. It provides really secure, often inflation-linked retirement income for most Dutch workers. Less individual risk than our 401ks.
Interesting. Collective, not individual accounts. What about Australia? They have something different too, right?
Yeah, Australia has its superannuation system. It's mandatory employer contributions. A percentage of your salary goes into a retirement fund, usually one you choose, or a default fund.
Yeah.
It is a defined contribution system, like a 401k, meaning the outcome depends on investment returns. But because it's mandatory and universal, almost everyone builds up a substantial nest egg over their career. It's privately managed, but heavily regulated. So again, different from Singapore's state-run CTF, different from the Dutch collective model, but still focused on ensuring broad coverage through mandatory savings. It shows there are many ways to tackle this, all prioritizing long-term security more systematically than we often do.
So we've gone through education, healthcare, retirement, looking at all these global examples. When you pull it all together, some really clear themes jump out, don't they? It seems like the most successful systems, again and again, prioritize people, long-term human development, collective well-being over just short-term numbers or private profit. They focus on equity, on professionalizing key jobs like teaching, and on planning ahead.
It's definitely not just about spending money reactively, it's about smart design. Building integrated systems that meet core needs and prevent problems later on. Investing heavily in early childhood education, for example, or strong preventative health care that's not just an expense, it's a strategic investment that saves huge amounts later on remedial education or emergency room visits. These success stories consistently show that this kind of holistic, forward-thinking approach leads to better outcomes for everyone, and often it's more efficient and fiscally responsible in the long run, too.
So, bringing it back home, what does all this global evidence mean for us here in America? It feels like the playbook's already written for a lot of these huge challenges we face. The blueprints exist. What's the missing ingredient for us? Why aren't we doing it?
The sources are pretty blunt about this. They say America's healthcare crisis, and you could extend that to education and retirement too, isn't really a failure of medicine or technology or know-how. It's fundamentally a failure of political will and economic justice.
Political will.
Yeah.
The knowledge is there. The models work elsewhere. What's missing here, according to this analysis, is the political will, public consensus, and cultural shift toward treating education, healthcare, and retirement security as national priorities, on the same level as, say, national defense or the economy. It means making a collective choice to put people's long-term well-being first.
That's a powerful idea, a cultural shift, because education really should be that ladder of opportunity for every kid. But too often, like the sources say, it just locks in inequality. And access to healthcare feels like it should be a basic human right, not a privilege you might lose if you lose your job. These aren't just policy details. They're fundamental to whether people can live secure, productive lives.
Which leads to the really critical question. How do we start a national conversation that gets past the usual political fights and actually looks seriously at these proven solutions? It means we have to challenge some really deep-seated ideas about what our systems are for. Are they primarily for generating profit? Or are they for ensuring everyone can thrive? Are we constantly putting out fires? Or are we proactively building systems that are fair, strong, and built to last? These global examples give us a pretty clear roadmap, arguing strongly for prioritizing human development, equity, and collective well-being for the long haul. It's about building a future where opportunity is real for everyone. #outro.
So, to wrap up our deep dive today, other countries aren't just doing things differently. In many ways, they're doing them smarter when it comes to basics like education, healthcare, and retirement. They offer real, proven blueprints for how America could reform these systems, these huge challenges we face. They're not impossible to solve. The solutions aren't secrets.
They exist, they're out there, they're working right now, today, in lots of countries.
So the real question isn't how do we fix these fundamental systems in America? We have the maps. The real question is when. When will the political courage, the shared vision, the national determination finally match the clear moral need and the economic need to make these kinds of profound, lasting changes? What's it going to take for us to truly commit as a nation to investing in long-term human flourishing, not just short-term metrics or private gains?
It's a question that really pushes us to think about our core values, doesn't it? What kind of society do we actually want to build for ourselves and for the future?
Indeed. Maybe as you go about your week, think about how just one of these ideas from abroad, maybe treating teachers like doctors, or making healthcare simpler, or guaranteeing retirement savings. How might that change the conversation in your town or your workplace, or even just how your own family plans for the future? We hope this deep dive gives you some serious food for thought.